From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. Whenever we talk about race relations and the struggles that we have in some of our communities between police officers and citizens, most experts say we need to come together around the table and talk it out. Now, it's not always easy, especially if emotions are high, especially if incidents have happened. But the Nashville Public Library is helping to get the conversation going with a training called Civil Rights and a Civil Society. Here's News Channel 5's Jason Lamb telling us about how talking out that trouble will get to the solutions.
We are delighted to have each of you here.
In a room dedicated to civil rights past.
Why we're afraid to have those conversations.
Was an event held to talk about where civil rights will go in the future.
That we're going to make this part of our training.
That's why Alicia Buford showed up today.
Knowledge is powerful, and the more you learn, the more it enables you to even make better decisions.
Read the next one for us, please.
She's part of Metro's Citizens Police Academy.
Report all serious incidents.
Some of the first civilians to take this class on civil rights training, the same one Metro police officers get.
I think they're hard conversations to get started.
And Metro's top cop was on hand today to explain that Nashville's civil rights history in the 1960s isn't as far removed as you might think.
It's not something that we can easily forget. And then it becomes even more pertinent today because we're facing some similar issues.
And now the Nashville Library says even more people will get this training thanks to a $25,000 grant.
It's beyond just the police department. So we utilize this course to address those biases and address those differences so that we all will feel more comfortable talking about race relations.
Upon graduation, I plan to pass the information on to the community.
And that's just what organizers hope to hear, as some say the conversation about civil rights is just as relevant today as it was 50 years ago.
And here to talk to us about the program is Andrea Blackman, who is the founder of Civil Rights and a Civil Society, that whole program that has come out that we saw in the piece where Jason talked. It sounds like it started with a focus on making sure law enforcement officers had some schooling when it came to civil rights. Talk about the beginnings of the program.
Correct. Thank you, April. The program did start originally with bringing the new law enforcement recruits, Metro police recruits. The first class was April of 2015 with 60 new recruits. The goal was to educate these new officers to Nashville's role during the modern civil rights movement. So to get them to understand what role we played as far as leadership, how Nashville responded after the Brown v. Board decision, how Nashville leadership was a part of every major movement of our time. So that was the impetus in the start of the program.
Andrea, I mean, you're the founder, you had the idea. What made you say, I'm going to create a curriculum where cops need to come and sit around the table and learn a little bit about our history?
I think it was a joint effort. So you have to think about what was going on 2 years ago and where our country, every time we turn on television, and what was unfolding in front of us. And I will say that the training team from the police department actually approached us about educating their recruits. And we had 14 years of engaging the community with the Civil Rights Room as its center, as the center of engagement. And we thought we would build upon 14 years of history and incorporate what the police wanted and what they needed, looking at history, but then lending itself to contemporary conversation.
Were you surprised when they came a-knocking?
Yes. Yes.
What went through your mind when they said, hey, we know you have this resource here. We know you have the power of history and learning here. We want you to teach us. What went through your mind?
How am I going to make this a safe place? How are we going to craft a program that gives law enforcement officers a safe place, or future law enforcement officers, a place that they can ask and grapple with questions themselves. What role did the police play in 1960? So when these students are sitting at a lunch counter, how are we going to create a space that they feel comfortable asking themselves and grappling with whatever implicit biases they may have? So that's what was going through my mind initially. And how can we do that and not let our program be like every other diversity training that was going on around the country? So we wanted it to be unique in that aspect. We wanted to make sure that history was the gateway for these conversations, and that has been something that we keep at the forefront of what we do.
Was it just diversity training, or was it a little sensitivity training too?
I think it was both. I think it was both. I think it was sensitivity. I think it was the idea of giving voice and giving venue for the community at a time when we really needed it.
Then you received a grant about a year ago that helped you kind of expand.
Correct.
So not only are you working with law enforcement officers, but now this program is available to other members of the community. Talk
Correct.
about that.
Correct. We received a $25,000 grant from the Nissan Foundation that was started after the Rodney King uprising. And so the funding is to create a replica of the program beyond law enforcement. So the conversations that we were having with law enforcement, they need to be had in our schools, in our K through 12, and corporations, and nonprofits and for-profit organizations. So we replicated the program and created various curricula to go into these schools, into organizations, major corporations here in town, and replicate the program beyond law enforcement.
Is the conversation consistent, and I guess the program consistent, no matter which group you're in front of? Because I can imagine standing there and relaying this information, and I wonder how you deliver the message to an officer versus a kid in the community that sees these officers maybe in a different light than they see themselves, versus a citizen who sees the whole struggles of society. Is it the same learning all the way through, or do you taper it at all based on your audience?
We definitely taper it. And each curriculum is designed for that audience. So when we are in our local middle schools, the conversation is about character. It is about leadership, but again, still through the lens of history, still through the lens of what happened here in Nashville, leading up to what is going on now in our country. But we taper it to fit whatever organization or group that we're working with. So when we're working with corporate America, it's about the biases that we all bring into our jobs with us every day, looking at historic photos from 1957, making assumptions and making presumptions about what we see, and how does that translate into what we do every day.
And then do you have sort of an idea of where this goes from here? Because right now it's Nashville, Middle Tennessee, but I'm wondering, where do you take it from here to make sure that this history is being shared? Not that you can't read about it, right? But it's in a way that you've packaged it in a way that I think is making a difference. How do you take it elsewhere?
That's a great question. So one of the things that happened immediately after we announced the program is that we started getting calls immediately from Charleston, South Carolina, after the Charleston massacre, from Baltimore, from Atlanta, from Soweto. We've gotten calls from South Africa of how do we replicate this program to have conversations with law enforcement and make it different, that it's not bringing law enforcement or clergy and community all together at one time. It's about being in a safe place with those like you. And so we have created a template of how we utilize local history to tell that narrative. And so we are actually replicating our program right now for a group in Baltimore. We've been asked to go to Hillsborough County in Oregon, and also in Charleston, South Carolina.
Was that your vision when you first started this, when you said, I'm putting together a program that's going to help, these future police officers in my hometown, and now I'm going and traveling and telling it and taking it elsewhere?
I had no idea. But the power of conversation, when you were actually sitting there looking at law enforcement or a sixth grader, grappling with these photos and asking themselves some very tough questions, we knew that the power of conversation was bigger than what we initially thought it could do.
Tough questions, but also honest questions.
Definitely.
Are you getting, I wonder, some kind of really honest and maybe powerful, sometimes shocking feedback about what they're seeing?
We are, and that's part of the training in the program. So not only are the participants honest, we have to ask ourselves as facilitators how we come into this program with honesty as well. And how do we grapple with raising an African-American teenage son in today's society. So all of those issues, they're tough questions on both sides, and we have to answer those. But I think once we get past the initial shock of of having and comfort of having those conversations, it becomes a lot easier. And we actually see that we actually are more alike than we are different. And you want the same things in life as I want in life. And how do we get to that place of creating a civil society or redefining what a civil society is?
That's your key learning, I bet. But I wonder, do you see others what their key learnings are once they've gone through the course and you get that feedback? What's that aha moment from each of those groups that you're teaching? The
aha moment comes usually with, I never knew that happened in my city. Now that I know, for instance, with young people, now that I know that Nashville was on the forefront of leading, then maybe I too can be an agent of change, so forth. So we're seeing that a lot with young people. I asked a group of 6th graders a couple of weeks ago, what is it that you were willing to die for? These are 6th graders at a local middle school here in town, and you would be amazed with these young people. We had spent an hour in the civil rights room. They were already somewhat familiar with what happened here in our city, and they all started answering questions like, I am willing to die for prison reform or restorative justice or homelessness. And so we are seeing these conversations of people actually saying, this happened here. We too can be agents of change in our community as well. Wow, and getting those brains working in a different kind of way, because I wonder what those answers would have been before they came to your class. I wonder. Andrea, let's take a quick break, and I want to bring in another guest that has taken what you're doing and is trying to carry it to new levels as well. Not only is your program taking off and going across the country and out of the country, but you all are doing some interesting things with those words that you're getting and those thoughts that you're getting from the people going through those classes. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more on this topic. We'll see you back in just a little bit.